Welcome to Investigator News. And today, I had gotten a drop this week of a lot of private information, a lot of information that's been unredacted. Um, and so I'm going to bring forth a lot of truths over the next few weeks. This isn't an easy story. It starts with the boys on the track. And why does it start then? Because two boys were in a place they shouldn't have been. And what it did was it started unraveling what was going on in Washington. And this goes back decades. It goes back even to Laos and Vietnam, when we were, the government, our own government, was using Air America to for drug trafficking. And they were drug trafficking heroin. Now, this is something I have been working on for years, decades. But it always sparked an interest in me. But when the boys died on the tracks, I knew there was something more to it. Good morning to Karen and Mary. If there's questions, I'm going to try to get them answered as I go. This is very in detailed. I will be exposing quite a few politicians today. And you'll start understanding of why we see what we do today. The big question is, are they still running drugs? Yes, unfortunately. That was some of the private information that was sent to me, that it didn't end just in 83, 84. It didn't end when the Clintons went to Washington. It continued. Arkansas is a big hub of drug trafficking, human trafficking. Yes, they've moved the airstrips, but we still know where they're at, and they just moved north. Not only that, but they're using other airstrips of other politicians that will agree to bribes or lots of money or being a part of this to continue the drug trafficking in our country. Good morning to Susan. So yesterday, basically, I wanted to tell you about the boys. Today, it's going to be a lot about Barry Seal, what he tried to do. If you guys got a copy of Air America with Tom Cruise, throw it in the trash. It's trash. And I hope Tom Cruise wasn't a part of this. I don't know. I've never been able to uncover it. I've looked. But I don't think, I'm going to say I don't think he knew. But in my heart and rumors, I think he was a bigger part of this than just being an actor for Barry Seal. Barry Seal was a drug trafficker, folks. He wasn't no hero. He wasn't no superstar. He was, and of course, he didn't look like Tom Cruise. He was a jolly old, I say jolly old elf. He wasn't that good looking. So I'm going to get busy on this so I can get as much of this as I can to you guys. And the more you hear, the more you're going to understand of why we have top politicians that are covering things up, and why we have hearings. I always thought the hearings was to get to the truth, not cover up the facts. And that's what they have been doing for decades. And as you listen today, you'll understand. I try to look at the documents, pull from the documents. Now, I don't have a video until tonight, and you'll start seeing who these players are by face. I just wanted to get through this morning to where I can get us past those that are at the root, as Harris would say. She always wants the root cause. Well, this is the root cause, and I'm going to expose it this morning. Now, Air America was an American passenger and cargo airline established in 1946, but it was covertly owned and operated by the CIA Bush family from 1950 to 1976. It supplied and supported covert operations in Southeast Asia during not only Laos but Vietnam War, including providing support for drug smuggling in Laos. Now, Mena, Arkansas was Barry Seal's biggest part of his career. Mena Airport is a small airport in a town in the mountains, which is pretty much on the western part of Arkansas. And according to the papers in Arkansas Gazette, Barry Seal set up at Mena in 1981. Mena was the base operation. It was the base, the biggest operation of drug smuggling in this country until his death in 1986. There were pictures of his plane here at Mena that they say never existed. Russell Welch and Bill Duncan and Mara Leverett have the best information on this case, and both Barry Seal and the boys, Kevin Ives and Don Henry, that they have on these boys, and they have been able to pull all the information together. Welch and Duncan, Bill Duncan was an IRS DEA investigator for the state of Arkansas. Russell Welch, he was a DEA investigator for a majority of the entire state. Now, Barry Seal brought in a reporter named Camp, and he tried to explain that he wasn't doing anything wrong. And certain points he mentioned working for the CIA and George Bush. This is George Bush Sr. Barry said he was just a simple family man, and most documentaries, like the one by Camp, fail to mention Mena. Mena is always seemed, or Arkansas has always seemed to be left out of all of these publications and documentaries. Now, you'll find a few, but for the most part, Mena is not to be mentioned. Even during the Iran-Contra hearings, when Mena was brought up, the hearing went into closed hearings into the SCIF with only certain members were allowed. And I was told there were some higher ups that wanted this covered up. Now, in the 80s, there was a war in Nicaragua. One side, the ruling Marxist regime, Sandinistas, the other, the rebel Contras, pro-democracy, freedom fighters. It seems that we were supporting both. And why? Because both could funnel cocaine and crack into the United States. Now, this was, like I said, in 1983. Seal, already running drug for years now, added Contra support through George Bush. Not only that, but Clinton is our governor. Barry Seal, before 81, was already doing business and drug smuggling with the Ochoa family in Colombia. And each trip, he would move 200 to 350 pounds of cocaine, sometimes more, 1 million a trip. And that seemed to increase as we included other countries. Bill Duncan traced Seal's profits back to Mena banks. We know this to be true as bank tellers and branch managers testified to it. And not only that, but branch managers testified to it. Russell Welch, the investigator, was told to look into rumors of drug trafficking in Mena, and he discovered all the planes were all types usually used in trafficking, but modifications. Um, the modifications that Barry Seal did here in MENA that was set up was not following FAA regulations. And when the FAA had went to um, pose um, fines on them, it was always stopped or it went towards George Bush, which it was snuffed before any regulations or fines could be added to the MENA airport. William Duncan, within a short time, had all the records to show cocaine trafficking operation at the MENA airport, pretty much the home and base of the operation. With Barry Seal indictments, they were sent many occasions by quite a few officials here in Arkansas. But we found that it stalled at the district attorney or attorney general's office at the time. And as time went on, all law enforcement in Arkansas seemed to know about the drug trafficking that was happening. In a DEA report in 1983, it shows SEALs trafficking not only in 83, but also seeing FBI, CIA in Arkansas all over the news at the time. And what it was we had, and I believe this is when I seen Mueller and Comey and quite a few from the CIA and FBI that was on our news here. And no one really knew why. We just knew that it was part of Barry Seal in 1983. And the DEA even had Seal's flight route documented, and MENA as the hub for all the drugs and the guns. Even Louisiana DEA sent letters to all the states, DEA informing them of Seal's activity in their states and his associates. Now, who was his associates? At this time, Arkansas DEA that was working on it didn't know at the time. While FBI was in Arkansas, they told Welsh and Duncan they were to ignore what was happening in MENA. Duncan to forget those indictments. Indictments were never going to go anywhere. It would be stopped, it would be snuffed, and it was best off for his own well being that he not go any further with this. They discovered that guns were being smuggled to Nicaragua, but guns that were being made here in Arkansas, one of our armories. So that made this the hub. It was made out of Jacksonville. It was the armory was located in Jacksonville, which is really close to the Air Force Base, which was an easy trip for us to supply guns to not only the Contras, but the Sandinistas. So no one was ever prosecuted at that time for it because it was aid, considered aid to Colombia and the fighting that was going on there. So no one was prosecuted. And everyone that was involved was either too scared to talk or dead. So this is real, folks. This is something that we live through here in Arkansas. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so the question is going towards last night's show. I can't, Karen, I'm sorry, I won't answer any of that today because I think this is way more important. That's a farce. What you guys seen with the January 6th thing last night on TV, that is a made up thing. It's only to cover up what's going on. And what's going on, this is part of it. I just suggest you guys hang in there with me and get through this. So in 1983, when I seen Barry Seal's plane fly over my house, it had distinct markings. It did look like a C-130 camouflage, but it had yellow. At that time, a friend of mine was a master sergeant load master and told me no such plane was at the base. It was discovered that Barry Seal was being protected um, by the Iran Contra um, um, secret operations. And it was not only that, but it was controlled by our federal government under Reagan, run by George Bush. Many crimes committed during those years and all the investigations were shut down one after another. Many drug indictments or investigations shut down even the DEA in Arkansas. We found that the DEA was stunted and weren't allowed to do any, they could do any investigations except looking into Mina. The U.S. attorney was part of shutting down the investigations, but then when the attorney general started looking, is there really drug trafficking going on? One of the biggest drug trafficking in the United States, they shut the U.S. attorney down. As other states pointed to Arkansas to investigate, they were getting subpoenas, but they couldn't even get anywhere. U.S. attorneys from all over the country kept going to George Bush and saying that this is what's going on, that we have one of the biggest drug trafficking hubs out of Arkansas. As we seen Reagan get on TV and say no to drugs, or that he was getting to the bottom of it. As he was trying to get to the bottom of it, George Bush was basically sending false information to Reagan, and this was in documents, because he didn't really care much for Reagan. And so he was leading him that Cuba and was the one that um, was pushing the drug trade, not Colombia, or at this point we were even looking at Panama. So, so anything that said Mina was to be shut down. So they've been covering it up since day one, and they are still covering up Mina as of today. Now, SEAL had over 60 employees. I want to show you how big this was, and some aerial electronics, um, and the head of military grade hardware, even nose cones for drugs, and later laser beams. SEAL running a major organization, full trafficking racket, was bigger than ever in the United States, and now protected by the United States. He had 20 planes and later jets fixed with winged aircraft, a half a dozen helicopters, and also two small ships. Welsh had said the feds and the DEA and the FBI took the case from him, and as he watched for several years after. There was even a wiretap on his phones. In 1984, Miami indicted SEAL for trafficking. Then Arkansas hit him the same week with one, but SEAL um, made the deal. Made a deal with George Bush and his task force. And then FBI report came out, and the drug report was spanning from 77, 78, 79, and 82. And it was even classified. And it wasn't until lately that I was able to get this information on these drug reports actually under Freedom of Information without it being black. And it's why during Iran Contra hearings, Mina wasn't to be discussed. The FBI at that time didn't mind arresting SEAL, and why not? Uh, they had to cover their tracks. If they arrested SEAL, it would cover up the fact that this was one of the biggest drug trafficking hubs in America. And Mina and the drugs, the CIA, of course, turned a blind eye, saying they didn't know nothing at all when it was looked at from Florida and the indictments of SEAL, not only here, but Louisiana and Florida at the time. And it was brought up during a Whitewater. And the problem is it never should have been brought up. And so during Whitewater, the SEAL plane was mentioned and being shot down in Nicaragua. And what we know is the CIA owned and operated Air America, and SEAL and his pilots were mostly Air America. And that's something big, because Air America, if you remember when I described it, they were the ones that were getting the heroin uh, out of Laos and Vietnam at the time. So, uh, but it was discovered in the document saying the CIA wasn't Air America, but by then it was too late, because past documents showed they were a part of it, and showing them in 1969 in Laos. There was a sting operation against SEAL by the CIA, and what it was is to bring him down, but they wanted to really kind of expose the Sandinistas. Um, so they put cameras on SEAL's planes, and they asked SEAL, well, you need to be a part of this to expose the Sandinistas is the drug trade. And there were hearings at the time that went over this way later. It was like 94-ish or so in the House Judiciary Committee. Um, so Congress and Senate knew about this in 1994. Okay, now get this. CIA lied to Congress about all of this later. And SEAL was bringing at least 30,000 pounds of cocaine in a few years, and all of it being moved from MENA. But Arkansas sat for decades saying all of this was a conspiracy. Even Hillary claimed all of this was a conspiracy during the 2016 election against Trump when Trump brought it out. It seemed everything that we had against Hillary at that time that was coming forth, and Trump was even knew about it and brought it out. It was told that we didn't know. Arkansas lies. Arkansas is a conspiracy theory, and she even wanted to put the tinfoil hats on us. So in 81, I want to go back when Reagan was sworn in office. Rumor right off had him and Bush didn't get along. There was a huge rift. There's also documents that came out later after the death of Reagan saying that they did not get along, and the family hated the Bush family for what was done to him. Now, 69 days after Reagan was sworn in, Hinckley tried to assassinate Reagan. And there's this big thing to this. Hinckley's brother just happened to be close friends with George Bush's son, Neil. And according to the records, Hinckley gave George Bush huge amounts. The Hinckley family gave George Bush huge amounts of campaign money to override Reagan on certain decisions. Even the day that they tried to assassinate Reagan, the two Hinckley's brother and George Bush's son, Neil, were getting together for a private meeting for lunch. Huge amounts of money, campaign money. Bush and Reagan decided to send aid at this point to South America. They convinced Reagan to do this. So Bush Reagan decided to help South America at this time, and there was some ties in the embassy in South America. And what was odd was when even the Arkansas DEA tried to call the embassy, they ended up even being hooked up to a drug house. Now this was a private phone to get a hold of private embassy ambassadors. And so every time they would call, according to the documents that I received, that it was going to a drug house and asking how many pounds or that they wanted loaded onto the Barry Seal planes. So one of Seal's friends, if you want to know what happened to Seal's planes, one of his closest friends was shot down in his plane that worked for Air America, knew of MENA, the heroin and drug trafficking by the government in the 60s and 70s. Okay, so at this time, Noriega and Panama president and Mexico cartel met up, and also a meeting with Mexico at this time and starting a relationship. After a few years, Seal had a storage place in Mexico for planes and drugs, And Noriega worked for the CIA since the 70s. Now, he met with Bush numerous times, and we found out it wasn't just Colombia, like the government wants us to believe, but it was Honduras, Panama, Costa Rica, and all of them were rich with cocaine, and each was sending it up for the guns. Uh, and was and it was money for Bush to put into his pocket. But in 1981, when SEAL moved to MENA, it was the guns and for drugs. So what we seen was when Reagan was kind of around a lot, it was only to send aid for the drugs, and they would send us back a certain amount of money in return. But as it went on, it turned once Barry Seal had established the MENA airport. Um, it went from the guns for money, it went for guns for the drugs. And of course, because then they had Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton in place that was willing to work for them to receive all the cocaine that they would want or needed, and they could do with what they wished with it. And it was in the hands of the cartel at this point. When they met with, um, um, there was a meeting with Mexico at the time, with Noriega in Mexico and a few others, Colombia and those. This is when they brought in the cartel. And this is very important for you guys to know. Okay. So now it was officials, it was politicians, it was Congress, it was Senate, it was the CIA, FBI, and our own president, Bush, that was working with the cartel at this point to start funneling in the drugs. And of course, it was all happening in MENA. Did we try to tell people? Yes, but the media wouldn't listen because the media was already bought out by the Clintons. Uh, and these meetings that were going on was in many countries and over the decades. So now the hearings, the judge is hard ties usually to the Democrat Party. Now Oliver North was put in charge of it at some time. Not only that, but CIA Casey changed in the early 80s the drug trafficking laws to exempt the CIA from charges, stating uh, it basically started to unravel in 1995 when it was starting to get exposed. So back in the early 80s, when CIA Casey changed the drug trafficking laws to exempt the CIA from charges, it was not only that they didn't have to pay for the drugs that they were using, is they said is a sting operation, and they bought it. They didn't have to be charged or taxed on it. But also, what it did was it changed it to where even the cartel could not be charged for drugs that they were moving into this country. Um, so the CIA funded crack epidemics in LA. And this was a lot of when we were starting to see the fall of not only the government, but started exposing George Bush and Clinton's and Oliver North and Casey, part of the FBI, that they were selling guns, or they were giving guns to not only the cartel, but Iran Contras and the Sandinistas. So you got to remember that the cartel was added in 82, 83, when we started getting the big push. The CIA sold it cheap on the streets of LA to the Crips and the Blood. And this was exposed by Gary Webb. Now, he's a journalist and he wrote the book Dark Alliance. He was killed shortly after all of this started getting exposed. Now, there was a drug dealer. His name is Freeway Ricky, and he was close to Maxine Waters. Now, it wasn't till later in the years that I figured out it was actually her drug dealer. Quite a few Contra cocaine dealers from the South America were seen at the White House throughout George Bush vice presidency when he was in charge of everything with the Contras and the drug trade and the cartel. Even Reagan praised him for it and said he wasn't really a part of what he was doing with foreign affairs through the Foreign Affairs Committee with the Senate and the Congress, but he was very proud of him. The mid 80s, Reagan accused drugs coming from Cuba. In 83, it was discovered that Escobar was a big part of this drug trafficking into the United States. And it made it easier so that they would only have to take short trips to Mexico out of those Cuba and Panama and Honduras and Costa Rica. It was easier to get it to the cartel to bring it over the border, to get it into LA and other places along the border. Now, remember the FBI reports of drugs in 77, 78, and 79? Noriega and Escobar, with Panama and others, and the CIA were drug trafficking. And SEAL it was kind of convenient in the picture. So in 1980, with other Air America pilots, they was seen to, they did it in the 60s and 70s and Laos and Vietnam. So in the 80s, it was mostly dealing with the cartel. So it made it really easy for Barry Seal to use Air American pilots to use for MENA to be the pilots that would fly drugs, the guns and the drugs from here, not only getting it from Panama and Colombia and those countries, but to get it with their little Cessnas to be able to spread it throughout the United States. So Bush at the helm, backing up through the Judicial Committee with Congress. Now, the other thing that backed him up, of course, everyone had this love for Oliver North. So Oliver North was in there with George Bush, and Cheney at this point was now entering the picture to be able to cover up what was going on in the biggest hub in the United States. Senator Kerry ran a hearing in 88 on the drug trade, but realize he ran the hearing and he was, understand folks, when you are in charge of a hearing, it's to steer clear anything that might come out of it, or what it does is it brings out whistleblowers that need to be taken out. So during this hearing of Kerry ran, and we're talking Senator Kerry, CIA Bush and MENA, it was stated that it was heating up that Steele was the fall guy, not to expose our governments, but in the drug trade. But Steele would be the perfect one to put forth to do the blame. And basically not to expose that our governments were trading with the cartel at this moment, because it was starting to come out during this hearing that the cartel were arrested and charged, and the State Department and the government needed to stop it. And this goes all the way back into the 90s. So from the 80s to the 90s, every time something would come up, or one of the cartel or one of Noriega's men would be arrested, of course, Senator Kerry would be in charge of these judicial Senate committees or foreign affairs committees to be able to block it, or to find out what these whistleblowers actually knew. And if they did expose it, according to some of the cartels, like Escobar, he said the worst place to be is in their jails or prisons, because nobody ever makes it. Not only that, but if you expose too much as a whistleblower, then you end up disappearing. And this, some arrested, and then the papers leaked out about the Contras with Oliver North. that were doing trade with our government for the guns and the cocaine. Some leaked photos came out with Oliver North on the flight line in Mina. It was joked about in Kerry's office by staff numerous times. And Kerry brought forth this hearing um, to weed out the whistleblowers, ex-staff members, um, not only that, members of Congress and Senate. When the hearing is called up, basically understand that when these hearings are brought up, it's basically to intimidate, warn, incarcerate if they fail. And they end up in jail, bad things happen. And if not, they send protesters or family, friends, and animals are the targets. And understand that this was in the 80s. This is when this started. So the hearings are basically, like I said, to weed out whistleblowers, to intimidate and warn and incarcerate if they fail to stand up for secrets that are being covered up. And it would also keep the American public from knowing what George Bush was doing, Oliver North was doing. Um, we have admirals Seacourt, Poindexter, and a few others that were being involved in this at this point. In 1989, Panama hearings, Kerry, that was in charge of, was to provide disinformation and also weed out records held by the cartel or AKA Escobar. And on the info, the CIA was basically discovered. They discovered that the CIA and the cartel millions and never disclosed why. But they never quit. The cartel told Kerry the CIA was basically funneling money for the cartel, and that they were trying to expose them during the Panama hearing in '88. So the Panama hearings were using the Foreign Committee to weed out whistleblowers that would expose the CIA, but not just that, inform them if they would turn on Congress, Senate committee members, that they would be exposed. And when they didn't, according to the CIA enforcements and informants, they led the way for Congress and Senate to go to different countries and make deals. So what had happened was they would bring him in, and if they would find out that they wouldn't turn Congress or Senate over for drug trafficking, what it did is it led the way for where we see now even certain members of Senate and Congress to go to different countries, and these same countries, Mexico, Panama, Costa Rica, Honduras, El Salvador. I mean, there's more being added that they could go and they could keep these deals flowing so they can all make the money. The hearing also discovered if the drugs and guns were still moving after the death of Seal. And their informants at the hearing said yes. Okay, so you hear that, folks. The government took over all of Seal's dealings through the Mina airport after his death. And so, according to what they were letting the American people know on the news, because the news media is really good for disinformation, was they were saying that all the drugs had stopped. Don't look at Mina no more. They closed up shop and Mina's turned a new leaf. And, so it's done, said, and now we don't have to worry. And according to a few, even the drugs had a slowdown. No, that was a lie. Because basically, we found out under this hearing that basically these were Noriega's and quite a few others. Noriega worked for the CIA, folks. Basically, his people that tend to be whistleblowers, they brought him up, and they were saying, did all these drugs keep flowing after Seal died? And they were saying yes. Well, the next question by a Republican was, Well, who's running it? And of course, Kerry, in charge of this, said that that was confidential information. And I believe it was Alito back then. And he says, but we need to know about this. If the drugs and the cocaine and the guns are still flowing, why? Why? This don't need to be happening. And we don't need to be dealing um, in the middle of a drug trade and being responsible for all of these drugs is out of Arkansas into the United States. Well, so interviews, um, so after SEAL, all the proceeds went to government officials, and interviews kept being mentioned that the CIA and Bush, in charge of the drugs and the guns, continued to flow. And Oliver North and Kerry is liaisons and of connectors to the cartel, to the Contras, as well as key Senate and Congress that kept going down through Mexico into these other countries to make sure that the cartels weren't angry or to make sure the drugs could keep coming. And what was in those C 130s going to Honduras and Panama? Of course, it was the guns. My friend, the loadmaster, told me was military weapons and weapons made at the Arkansas Armory, like I mentioned before, verified by documents by the FBI that came out during that 77, 78, 79 report that came out of the DEA here in Arkansas. Felix Rodriguez exposed all of them in the 80s as a CIA officer and working as a go between. So, what was the hearings for? To weed out the players that would harm the election at that time. Not just for Bush, but sitting Congress and senators. And that the Democrats needed those positions. And not only that, but Bush needed them in those positions to keep them quiet. Um, so Bush and the Democrats, this should have been an eye opener that Bush, Cheney were actually Democrats in disguise, but no one paid attention. But we did in Arkansas. Now, if you're talking about, you want to know, well, what presidency campaign was this? This was Bush Dukakis race in 1988. And Bush had to win due to trouble, not just in DC being discovered, but the CIA and the cover up troubles in Arkansas that were arising. It's kind of smokescreen. So you don't look at MENA. Let's do hearings. Let's do a big on the presidential campaign, and no one will know how bad the cartel and Noriega is in deep with not only our government but with the politicians. Now, Ron Paul in 1988 tried to expose this, claiming George Bush knew money paid out, and also he exposed Kerry. And it wasn't long after that Senate turned on Ron Paul to destroy him and his family. So now the conclusions of the Iran-Contra hearings, there were 6 pardons. Caspar Weinberger was one. All in deep with the Contras and the drugs for the guns to the cartel and Noriega. When Bush got in office, it after this campaign against Dukakis. Now, when Bush got in office, he took upon Chuck Schumer, and he rose to the occasion, setting forth for teenagers getting stuck on crack. And he was basically trying to bust them to further Bush's career. Now, Kerry rose to, now you guys realize that. What it was is there was a sting operation shortly after George Bush got in office where George Bush needed some crack, not for himself, but to show on TV. So Schumer went out and he was soliciting drug dealers to get the crack. And he wanted them to show up at a certain place. Well, he only wanted them to show up at a certain place because he was going to bust them, give George Bush the credit for it, and George Bush would have his crack. So that's where Chuck Schumer came into the picture. I guess you guys didn't know that one. So this busting him, it would further Bush's career. Now Kerry rose to the occasion too. It was set up to get key Republicans out of office, like Ron Paul, and put the blame on the drug trade. Now listen close. They wanted to put the blame on the trade on Republican, as millions from Arkansas were happening. Even disclosed Schumer was taking trips to see Noriega. This was the start of the twist, that it was the Republicans in the middle of the drug trade, and the Democrats were running the hearings saying, oh, how horrible this is. 1989, guess who stepped forward? Yes, in 1989, Joe Biden stepped forward trying to convince the American people the drug trade was disappearing. Nothing to see here, he said. Biden was a part of the Judiciary Committee, which included um, Kerry, to cover up the drug trade in California, but turn America away from Arkansas, and is soon to be Clinton running for office. Joe Biden's own bodyguard, being a whistleblower, was uh, clear then. Um, and then we moved to the Clinton with the squeaky clean governor from Arkansas, until Sarah McClendon, the journalist, during a press conference, asked Bill Clinton about the drug trade. Bill Clinton blew it off to the feds knowing all of this, and nothing happened in the state of Arkansas that he knew of. As she said, "Sir, the Republicans trying to blame you for a small air base in Arkansas. This base was set up by Bush, Kerry, and the CIA and other politicians." Now, with a smile and a chuckle, Bill Clinton claimed they didn't say anything to him, nor did he know anything, claiming local prosecutors had looked into the matter and nothing was found. And basically, during the exchange he had with Sarah, he never really denied it. And go back and watch the clip, folks. It's out there. Which means he didn't know about Barry Seal, and all the attention was all over the news. He always claimed he knew nothing about Barry Seal, but he had to have, because he was blocking investigation after investigation after investigation into what was going on in Mena, Arkansas. And not only that, then we started finding that Bill Clinton was funneling money through a parkometer out of Russellville, and it's called Palm. And while Clinton was governor, federal DEA and local DEA turning reports over to him on the drugs at Mena. And it was all to twist it back around that the Republicans were in the drug trade, and covering all Bush, Cheney, and top Democrats in charge of the committees to cover their tracks. See, in 1983, Bush Clinton became close friends. Oh, remember, he's like a son. He was, according to George and Barbara, that they were very, very close. And of course, he steered the story from Democrats to the Republicans. Clinton's, according to the document, spent many dinners, vacations around the Bush family for the years starting in 1982 going forward. So it was only logical that he rose to the occasion, not only as a attorney general for our state, but then a governor, and then a prime choice to become president. So in 87, Charles Black, that's the U.S. prosecutor in Arkansas, well, he told Clinton about Mena, and he swears to it. And Clinton supposedly gave him money to investigate it. But the money was never sent, which stopped all the investigations into Mena. Not only that, but Bill Clinton refused to even talk to Charles Black or any U.S. Attorneys in the state of Arkansas after that. So the Clintons knew about it and never stopped. And of course, it was put into place and covered up. And why not stop it after Seal died? It was only proof that in 87 that Bush, Kerry, the CIA, Cheney, Biden, the Clintons, all a part of all the drugs. It continued in 84, even on to this day. And we know this because the whistleblowers in 96 came forward saying it continued. And this is now Asa Hutchinson. We're moving into his era, would go under a Republican ticket for office. And we knew this. We knew Asa was Attorney General under the Clinton investigation. And not only that, but his district was right next to Mena, or there's even documents that show that he even was covering up what was going on in Mena. So as we in Arkansas were trying to weed out the corruption and power, we couldn't get nowhere. And so in 96, a whole new hearing went into play. And yeah, of course, it was to weed out the whistleblowers again. And an unexpected new Congresswoman, Maxine Waters, exposed them at this time. And this was in 1998, with documents showing a few involved in another cover up, like Dianne Feinstein, Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi. So at this hearing, to protect all of them, Feinstein was the chairman at the hearings in 1998. Pelosi was in charge of a committee to expose whistleblowers at another time. Even as well known in California at this time, she made many trips to Mexico and cartel countries, even praised cartels over the years as mentors. Nancy always in the public claimed Republicans targeted African Americans and kept racial tensions going, not only in California, but across our loving state, she said, and claiming it wasn't the CIA with drugs, but rich white people in California spreading crack to keep blacks in poverty. Most Republican white people and dealers, not the CIA, she said, until newly elected Maxine Waters spoke with Freeway Ricky to expose the CIA was bringing crack, just like Gary Webb tried to expose. And so now a dealer is confiding in Maxine and her new this new pandemic into her Skid Row district, but exposed Congress and Senate, knowing since '88 the drugs were flowing by the CIA, and the feds knew it. And this was all paid out by the State Department. So now, going into 96, they were now finding receipts that the State Department was involved. And the video of this hearing is still online. She was appalled at the government, and the government was a part of the drug trade. Yikes, right? She exposed them all. And when did she go from appalled to chump? And being one of them, even covered up reports. And what kind of reports were being covered up? Well, it wasn't really a report, it was blackmail. Come to find out through documents that the boys on the tracks, investigators, were able to figure this out and then get bits and pieces that had black on them, that now the black was uncovered. Well, come to find out, we're not sure if it was Nancy Pelosi or if it was Dianne Feinstein that actually had reports and pictures of Maxine Waters smoking crack. Nancy Pelosi at the hearing shut her down, and rumors she laid into her with threats after the hearing. And then another round with Feinstein gave her threats. So in 1998, Clinton's Kerry and Biden, Cheney, Schumer, Waters, Feinstein, Pelosi, all in the cover ups at this time, all taking trips into cartel countries, all having hearings to try to expose Republicans as the drug trade. And all the above guaranteed seats in political political realm for decades. Now, you hear that? They, all the above, were guaranteed seats in political areas for decades or for their lifetime for their part of cover up. So think on this, billions to make them rich, or bust out the cartel with Escobar and lose out. That was the choice. Do they cut off their money with Escobar and the cartel south of the border, or do they just keep their mouth shut? And now that they're all involved, they now have to cover each other up and not let it be known that they've all been a part of decades in drug trafficking and eventually human trafficking into the United States. And it was with Escobar and others of the cartel that eventually, one by one, were arrested that started talking and telling them that these rich politicians in the United States were the ones that were trafficking the drugs, and they were just there to cover each other up. In the investigations and the hearings, the problem, they thought in 88, it was only, well, they thought they had it done. And then it was to resurface in 1996 to see basically if the politicians controlled the drugs and to the addicts, and they could bend their minds to use them as recruits. Okay, and so what they did is now they would let all these drugs go into these cities of the Democrats, like Chicago and LA and New York. And see, they said what this could do if they controlled the drugs, they gave them to the addicts, that they could bend their minds to have them work for not only dirty work, but their protests. And this was from a whistleblower in 1988 that was working for the CIA, and said they could bring even their, and this comes from who the whistleblower was the same CIA guy that was working for Noriega. And at the hearing, he said they could even bring in Marxism if needed. He testified to this, and he went on to say it would end up with a Marxist socialism, even communist cells in every city where drugs flowed. You could get the ghettos going, and the highest politicians in place, we could control them. And it's easily blackmailed to silence if needed. With the drugs and the guns that were flowing to the gangs at this point, and even mentioned in the 90s, that they were giving the drugs and the guns to the gangs, and mostly were the Bloods and the Crips. And it also set up, they were setting up Republicans with drugs, prostitution to them or their kids to control them. And if they tried to expose them, it would look, so if you look at it today, think the control of drug flows to the United States. All of these hearings and all of these documents, all that info, it's out there for the public, but no one really cares. And the Republicans were sitting ducks, just trying to keep their own campaigns clean, not wanting to be to expose or try to go after top politicians, because blackmailing them never did work, or go out to ruin them in their political careers. Now, Ron Paul was brave enough to expose the Democrats being involved, and that's why we know what they did. And see, Rand Paul is still trying to expose them today, but nobody listens to him. And the key players in Barry Seal, though, one was Terry Reid, that he turned to whistleblower after blowing the whistle on Air America and these pilots. But not only that they had made these nose cones that was patented through the Hillary Clinton law firm, the Rose Law Firm, so they could hide the drugs there, and they could still put them on commercial airliners or any type of, they say DC-5, all the way to C-130s, all the way down to the Cessnas. And so she not only did she make this for the government, to them to use to smuggle their drugs, and not only that, but eventually became part of the laser programs for the Air Force. And of course, it was the patent on this. So her and the Rose Law Firm made a lot of money. Um, Let me answer. Okay, Linda. So let me put your question up there. So do I get this right? Maxine Waters was okay until she basically blackmailed into going along with what she caught doing meth. Okay, now realize at the very beginning I said that Freeway Ricky was friends with her. Okay, and this supposedly, according to Freeway Ricky, he had been dealing with Maxine Waters for a very long time. Now, you don't all of a sudden develop a crack problem. The problem was she had a crack problem all along. Where she's from, it's just they brought in so much cocaine and crack. I really do believe that, unfortunately, she was part of being stuck on it. And of course, so when they got the pictures of her, they said, "Look at what we got." Now, did she change over? Yes. And why? Because she became part of covering up for the United States, and then she could make money off the drugs as well. Um, so yeah, it's all been smoke and to keep us ignorant. Yes. Um, Nobody is over on the network. I'm staying here. Well, it depends. I'm showing the same thing. It just depends who you want to sit next to here. Um, so, um, so you guys kind of getting the picture of what we were dealing with in Arkansas? I mean, because we were all screaming, listen, listen, listen. They're taking this to Washington. They're taking not only the corruption and not only that, but they're taking the drugs and they're all going to Washington and they're going to do it to the rest of you guys. Nobody would, Rush Limbaugh wouldn't even listen to me. And I called him many occasions and said, Rush, you got to hear me out on this. No, he would say his little spiel, cut me off, and yeah, I did try. I did try. I even hung my flag upside down in Marysville, California, because I was so disgusted that Bill Clinton had made it into office. And so basically, um, the Air America pilots that were seeing what was going on, if they left, they were being hunted down by the CIA and chased all over the country. A lot of the Air America guys either came up missing, they found them suicidal, wound up dead, plane crashes. And so, really, Terry Reid, when he was sent to um, Mexico to run their storage facility out of Mexico, for it was in between what was going on with the cartel and our government through George Bush. When he found out what was going on, him and his wife fled. Well, they were chased for a couple of years, and then he went under the witness protection program and was able to make it through this. But they were after him for a very long time. Now, Oliver North with Felix Rodriguez, the drug CIA informant. Now, you may not recognize Felix Rodriguez unless you were back at that time during the hearings. What happened with him going into the late 80s is now you got to add Nadler, Mueller, and Comey. Now, Nadler is Clinton's top lawyer. This isn't just a theory or a conspiracy. These are documented, and it's exposed during the hearings. The documents under the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, of course. And they said they only Nadler and Comey and Mueller was only came into play to create the chaos. And what was some of the chaos that was going on when Nadler was a lawyer? is Monica Lewinsky. Get Monica Lewinsky out of your little brains. Uh, oh man, Monica Lewinsky was only put in there so the not only the Clintons wouldn't expose them for um, the drugs, but also they had been selling our top um, nuclear secrets to China. Now they wanted to bring in Whitewater and say, okay, look at Monica, look at Whitewater. But we even find out that Whitewater was only to rip off senior citizens in a prime loan scandal um, um, and blame it on their friends, the McDougalls. And now I got inside information with the McDougalls in the Whitewater is they blackmailed them. They blackmailed Susan McDougal to the point where she won't talk. Well, they put uh, Mr. McDougal in prison where he died weirdly with a heart attack, only for them to say, oh, he had a heart problem all along. No, he didn't. I met a few of his doctors, and his own doctors that were ended up being my doctors told me that he never had a heart problem. So yeah, that's what happens. Not only that, but during the 80s, we seen Epstein in Arkansas, and Epstein and Weinstein basically about the same time. And after that, we started hearing about human trafficking going on. So Oliver North, even though he did all that shredding during, you remember the Iran hearings, he said, we just shredded and we shredded and we shredded. And his secretary, oh, yeah, we shredded, we shredded. Well, the problem is you can only shred what's at the State Department, the DOJ, and the FBI. The problem was is Arkansas had all the documents. And so um, basically they didn't get enough. Or, even we have discovered in recent documents that Mueller was basically during this investigation with 10, 11, they say maybe even 12 of Hillary's top lawyers was only put into this into the Hillary investigation, Russia. It was only so they could start shredding. The problem is we had the documents in Arkansas. Um, and the heroin in Laos, we all have to remember this was all under Bush's CIA, using Air America to funnel heroin to America for the guns. But also, it was to pay the Laos soldiers to keep the supply going. And even Castro, due to his connection to Iran Contra and the cartel flowing of the drugs, all under Barry Seal, making sure he went to all of them. And so, why did he have to die? Well, he started talking, letting the media know what our government was doing. So, look at the media today under the political administration bought and paid for to promote government and to find whistleblowers. Who's involved in this as far as the feds go? The State Department, Department of Justice, FBI, CIA, Justice System, the Senate, and Congress. So those old guys you see in political power right now, well, they're all in for the take and on the sham and on the cover up since 1984. Not only that, we've been able to expose admirals recently of Admiral Poindexter, Admiral Secord, and Colonel North, and all a part of this. The Iran Contras um, and Republicans uh, uh, accused of having shadow governments. And it was the Republicans that came forward in saying that they're using the Army, Navy, Air Force to promote their shadow government. Now, remember, it was in the document that showed Barry Seal having CIA planes and ships sold to him and given to him drug trafficking. And add Oliver North to that, that told Senate CIA William Casey that he was a part of it. Oops. They keep slipping up on these hearings. So more and more they try to get, according to the documents, they try to get more people that don't know too much, that are the whistleblowers, to uncover them and to either get them to shut up or help cover it up. Now, Barry Seal, he was shot in the head in his car. Now, don't think that they keep saying that he went down with his plane. No, remember I said his friend was? And that was only when Seal died, the plane was given to his friend, and his friend, uh, they had to give the plane to his friend due to the fact that this was one of the top Air America that knew what was going on in Laos and Vietnam, and all of them going over to Barry Seal and starting the drug trafficking and even eventually child trafficking, um, basically into the United States. So Barry Seal was shot in the head in his car to keep him from testifying. This other guy, they shot the plane down to keep him from talking. See, he is exposed, um, basically, um, the CIA to the media on sting operations, so that the media, that are all CIA operatives, that if you get a top spot at any of the networks, you are CIA media trained or journalist trained. So they're key players to keeping the government from being exposed on the drug trade in our country. And not only that, most of all, the child trafficking. Seal couldn't talk. He knew all the key players, even high level politicians, especially Bush and then Governor Clinton. So if you guys have any questions right now, I'm going to try to cut it here and do more tonight since we're over an hour. Um, and so, as you could see, folks, this has been something that's been going on. And I myself, I was so shocked when I found out that key politicians, Schumer and Pelosi and Nadler, and there's even Durbin and Leahy, um, all of them were a part of it. And what we've seen in California with so many trips that Nancy Pelosi made to go talk to Mexico, or she would be in El Salvador, she'd be in Panama. And always, it wasn't with the presidents, it was secret meetings that she was having, is what we were told in California. Now look at today. Yeah, I watched the whole, Karen, I watched every moment of uh, the Iran Contras to find out what was going on. I watched all the hearings of the Panama drug trafficking. All of the ones, the hearings that I told you about today, I watched because I wanted to make sure I got it right. And so Maxine Waters, she was just another drug addict that got a politician seat. That's all I have to say. And think about some of these others that we can think of that's in politics right now that you kind of wonder. Um, that's why I call Camilla Harris a pothead, because I'll just add this tidbit. We knew that Camilla Harris smoked weed when I was in California, and she was uh, Willie Brown's um, um, mistress, because he was seeing Camilla Harris during when he was married, and he eventually divorced, and him and Camilla Harris got together, but it was only to gain a political career. But we all knew Camilla Harris was a pothead, so that's why I do. I could say it because we knew in California. Um, and so, see, is this part of a drug trade? Is she there to cover it up? And wow, how odd is it that she keeps making these trips to South America, Colombia, El Salvador, Mexico? Hmm. And see, that's what we were warned about by the whistleblowers in the and not only in the 80s, into the 90s. They kept telling us that these politicians were going down with secret deals with cartels. And then we have all of Nancy Pelosi coming out. Oh yeah, a lot of these cartel guys, um, they're my mentors. So, um, but you know what? This is just Barry Seal, folks. I haven't even gotten to what they did to the boys, and this is about the boys on the track and why. And so once I get to the boys on the track to be able to tell you the story, it'll all make sense of why they had to die. I mean, I bet you got an inkling of understanding of why they had to die because of drug drops um, that were being done at that time, and they stumbled upon it. They can't be exposed. Our government cannot be exposed for the drug trade they have been in since they got in office, and I'm exposing them. You know, look at what you heard about Maxine Waters today and Pelosi. Are you surprised? Or are you saying, nah, I kind of figured they were all corrupt, but did you know that they were part of the biggest drug and human trafficking operation, and that it was right here in my state? Hmm. So come on back tonight, and there's more, lots more. I'm going, like I said yesterday, I am uncovering these politicians for what they have done. And I'm not stopping. I'm not going to shut my mouth, and I'm going to expose them all the way to the end on what I know, and all only with the documents and evidence and my own experience that I can tell you I heard or I seen with these hearings. Please subscribe. And you know what? If you're hearing this, share this with your friends. Tell them they need to watch this. If they want to know what's going on and how twisted the Democrat Party has started. It was blaming us, conservatives and Republican, for all of this. Your friends and your family need to hear this. They, you know, like I said, I'll have a slideshow tonight for you to see some of the documents um, and pictures of all these people, so you can put a face to it, to a lot of these guys. Um, um, so come on back tonight and let's continue on with the uncovering of our government. Um, Subscribe, and over in Facebook, please hit the follow and like and share, 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 share. This needs to get out. You know that crap they're doing with this January 6th. Now I'll mention it, Karen. This crap that I seen, this needs to come out. And you know what? This is what they're afraid of. Why? Because all this stuff came out, weirdly enough, about 2 weeks ago. I was notified of it, kept my mouth shut. Now I got the big drop of all the evidence, all the documents, and lo and behold, they decide they're going to take January 6th on TV. Why? Because the information that I got and others have received. Now we got one or two dead in Arkansas that received this package. Um, so come on back. God bless. And we will definitely see you tonight. And please share this. People need to know this so we can do something about it and tell them we know the corruption they're doing. All right. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you back here tonight at 9 Eastern Time. Bye bye, folks.